The following contains situations and circumstances that are relatable to all women, but are still uncomfortable and sometimes quite awful. We don't pull any punches. Listener discretion is advised.
Life's a foolish game. Do you ever feel the same? Well, maybe we could change, turn the ship another way. Feel it in the darkness. We're sailing right into those jagged cliffs. Yeah. Some say we've always been insane. Hey, life's a foolish game. Life's a foolish game.
Picture it. You're a woman in medieval Europe. You're disadvantaged at every turn. Your lifestyle, your education, your very purpose in life is dictated and controlled by men. For the privileged, this could feel even more so when you're raised to affirm political alliances, procreate, and curry financial gain for your male relatives. But what happens when even this purpose is taken away by someone who never deserved it? Welcome to Frenemies, a Toil and Trouble Media original. On this show, we examine notable women and the rivalries that help define them. Today, the lives of two women depend on winning the affection of the same stupid man. It's the story of Catherine de Medici and Diane de Poitiers. Diane de Poitiers was born in January 1500 to an aristocratic family. The pampered and privileged daughter of one of the most cunning nobles of the day, Diane grew up with an overabundance of ambition and a shortage of shame. Standing at a striking 5'11", she practiced a version of self-care out of step with a majority of her female peers. She was health-conscious and clean. It's said she took ice baths in the morning, rode horseback 3 hours a day, wore no makeup, which at the time was laden with lead, mercury, and other toxins, and she even stayed out of the sun. She also maintained a strict diet, avoiding fatty cheese, meats, and cream, all staples of that full-figured Renaissance diet. As she grew, observers said she exuded iridescent beauty rivaling that of Diana, the Roman goddess of the moon. It was a flattering comparison she didn't mind leaning into, but it had its downsides. In Renaissance Europe, women were the property of their fathers and husbands, their virginity a prized commodity. Controlling their so-called purity was a means of ensuring the legitimacy of future heirs, crucial for inheritance purposes and continuing bloodlines. So noble girls were often married off shortly after, and sometimes before the onset of puberty, as a sort of freshness guarantee. Still, even then, they were frequently subjected to proofs of purity, a humiliating and invasive ordeal their male partners would never experience. At the age of 15, Diane was negotiated into a marital relationship advantageous to the family. In other words, she was traded off to a man 39 years her senior, the Count Louis de Brézy. It was considered by those who didn't have to bed him to be a good match. Count Louis was the son of King Charles VII's bastard daughter and admired for his reputation as a soldier. But from where she was standing, he wasn't nearly that spectacular. He was moody, stern, and not exactly a looker. He was also dumb as a stump, and some in court described him as being quite ugly. Still, Diane wasn't in a position to argue about it, being a girl and all. So, figuring she could always do worse, she settled into his castle in a presumed life of luxury. He must have thought he hit the lottery. In a time when women were expected to be quietly plump under layers of damask, sandwiching their heads between hair buns resembling Princess Leia, Diane was a hottie. as were her attentions to wifely duties. In deference to his barnyard body odor, she applied oils and perfumes to her neck and linens, packed her nose with flower petals and herbs, closed her eyes, and waited for it to all be over. Her method was successful. She gave him 2 daughters. And marrying a dumbass has its advantages. She didn't have to worry about playing tug-of-war with the household finances. Count Louis, happy to play soldier, believed money just redeposited in the coffers overnight, as if by magic. And he presumed his wife believed the same. It's not like he asked. Luckily, Diane was a dollar diva with an uncanny ability to capitalize on every opportunity. In a time when showing too much intelligence could get you burned as a witch, our girl was a one-woman Shark Tank. She employed smart investment strategies, optimized her resources, and made calculated decisions. She was painstakingly meticulous, keeping tabs on every expenditure no matter how trivial. No detail slipped her notice, and she quietly multiplied their wealth many times over. Another of Diane's favorite pastimes was posing in the buff for portraits. What was the point behind having a kicking body if you couldn't flaunt it? One of the more famous depictions of her is Francois Clouet's A Lady in Her Bath. It doesn't appear she got any guff over it. Instead, it just gave her street cred and made her alluring, erotic, and desirable. Still, marrying a trophy wife can only get you so far. It can't save you if you're an idiot. At one point, Count Louis inadvertently uncovered a plot against his cousin, the seated king, Francois I. Imagining the favors to be had as the one who dropped the dime, he ratted out the men who were involved. Enraged, the king did what any leader with unchecked and unlimited power would do. He ordered the entire group executed. What Count Louis didn't know was that Diane's father was involved, and he, like the rest of the flunky bunch, was sentenced to death. Diane and the de Poitiers clan busted their chops to save him, relying heavily upon their connections at court and volunteering for as many royal duties as they could. When Diane scored a gig as Queen Claude's escort, it was like striking 2 birds with the same stone. She could avoid that stupid husband of hers and continue to lobby for her father's freedom. In time, they succeeded in convincing the king to reverse his decision, but the victory was bittersweet. Papa de Poitiers awaited his release in a French prison and was never the same. Aside from bloodlines and institutional misogyny, Count Louis and the king lived for the battle. Francois loved to lock horns with his greatest enemy, Emperor Charles V of Spain. In his most spectacular defeat, Charles took Francois prisoner, and the two made an arrangement for Francois to swap places with his sons, Francois II and Henry, aged 8 and 6. Historians have yet to uncover evidence that the move banished Francois to the royal couch. The French power couple wasn't known for being particularly doting parents, so their concern was probably reserved for ensuring their heirs were bodily intact, not mentally secure. Nor did the death of the queen affect the arrangement. The boys must have been terrified when they were handed over to their kingdom's mortal enemy. Perhaps out of compassion, perhaps in reaction, Diane kissed young Henry as she sweetly said her goodbyes, leaving him with the memories of the rare, tender moment as his only comfort. As she did, Henry, nearly 20 years her junior, felt a twinge. In that moment, whether due to escalating trauma, prevailing mommy issues, or the fact that he inadvertently brushed up against a mature, firm boob, young Henry fell head over heels in love. Infatuated and undoubtedly more than a little pissed at his father's hostage exchange, Henry treasured Diane's gesture and would never forget it. When the boys were finally returned to France after 4 long years, Henry sought out Diane, spending more time with her and her family than Francois. And can you blame him? Later, the young priest claimed he had never felt love until the noblewoman took him under her wing. She was his savior, his refuge. Eager to smooth things over with his son, Francois asked her to tutor the boy, and Diane agreed. In case Count Louis pulled another dumb stunt, it didn't hurt to be prepared. Diane spent hours with the shy boy. While nothing inappropriate occurred, he was thrilled. He had the unlimited attention of his dream girl. Diane was perfect. Utterly charming and intelligent, devoted and attentive, she was the embodiment of security and trust. With her, Henry felt safe. He didn't have to worry about being sold out or abandoned. He was never alone. In 1531, the 12-year-old was ready to make his move. At the coronation of his new stepmother, Queen Eleanor of Austria, the royal family dressed in the new queen's colors as a gesture of respect. But in a declaration of his undying love, or, well, weird obsession at least, Henry wore Diane's colors. It set all the tongues in court wagging. Diane must have been taken aback by the public status change. It had to be flattering. Count Louis had never done such a thing. He couldn't even manage to wash the stench of Bordeaux off his wrinkled skin. Gross. Not long after, Louis's penchant for croissants finally got the best of him, and he kicked the bucket. At long last, Diane was free from her patriarchal shackles. As she contemplated her next move, she knew one thing for sure. She would use her freedom to create a new life for herself. Never again would she submit to the control of a man. But she knew this wouldn't be easy. Wealthy, young, and female, men weren't going to wait for the body to grow cold before showing up at her door. It would only be a matter of time before one of them grew froggy enough to jump. So she devised a plan. As a grieving widow, she had the best of both worlds. She could maintain a place in court and exercise control of her household fortune. As a really grieving widow, she could do the same while staving off proposals. So she gave herself a makeover, choosing only to wear black and white. The palette was ideal, lending itself both to grieving nobility and her moon goddess idol as well. Branding. Nice. To make the image even stronger, Diane designed a personal logo consisting of 3 intersecting crescents, indicative of the 3 visible phases of the moon. Flexing her power as a strong, independent woman, she strung her little boy crush along and posed for even more nude portraits. Everyone could see Henry was in love with her, and his affections could be useful. So she kept the boy at arm's length, flirting with him while refusing to share his crib. Bed. Step by step, they grew physically closer. When the timing was right, she took his virginity, consolidating not only their affections, but their influence and power. Now, while we take in this obviously gag-worthy moment, be aware that this act of statutory rape would never have raised eyebrows in court. Nobility, especially royalty, didn't play by the same rules and social expectations as commoners. They didn't even have to pretend. It's kind of like Steven Tyler isn't really expected to behave the same way as you or me when staying in a hotel. If the mini fridge ends up in the jacuzzi, well, oh well. The double standards extended to adultery as well. Men, particularly those of high social standing, could have as many sexual partners as they like, without worry of condemnation. And the higher their status, the more they could expect their circle to look the other way. As Henry grew towards adulthood, Diane kept the event a solo occurrence, speculating that a potential friends with benefits arrangement could be more advantageous than a romance. So she remained in the young man's life as his hot yet supportive advisor. She even helped choose his wife, her distant cousin, Catherine de' Medici. Caterina Maria Romola de Lorenzo de' Medici was born on April 13, 1519, in Florence, Italy. The Medici family, a banking dynasty turned political powerhouse, played a pivotal role in the Italian Renaissance. But in spite of this, she was far from advantaged. Catherine's very arrival in this world was tinged with tragedy. Her parents died within weeks of her birth, leaving her to be raised mostly by nuns in a convent, then by her grandmother, then by an aunt. When she was 8 years old, the Medicis were temporarily expelled from Florence by Holy Roman Emperor Charles V's forces, and our girl was held political prisoner. In spite of this, she emerged well-educated and with her mental health fairly intact. When Charles V reconciled with the family, Catherine was returned and she was placed under the guardianship of her uncle, Pope Clement VII. Recognizing her value as a tool for political gain, he began to search for the highest bidder. A suitable love match for his beloved niece. In fact, King James V of Scotland, Mary Queen of Scots' father, expressed an interest in marrying her twice. The first proposal came following the death of his first wife, Madeleine of Valois. It just didn't suit a regent of his position to remain single too long, with no chance of any of his procreation not being little bastards. Madeleine's father, our own King Francois I, suggested the girl as a substitute. But Pope Clement VII declined the offer. He was busy negotiating a deal with Emperor Charles V to marry her off to one of his sons. Not that it mattered. The deal fell through. James tried again when his second wife died. It doesn't look like being married to James was good for your health. This time, Francois put the kibosh on it. Following the death of Pope Clement VII, the French king assumed guardianship and saw her pairing with Henry as a way to strengthen ties within France, as well as secure the Medici's influence and financial support. And Catherine was quite a catch. She knew her Roman from her Greek, had refined taste, and knew her classical and contemporary sculptures and paintings inside out. Her sophistication, undoubtedly the result of growing up Medicis, greatly impressed her future father-in-law. She had very good taste and a good eye for quality. Not bad for a girl. As the spare, Henry's value was in shoring up alliances. It was a royal edict and divine determination, all at once. The king arranged for the marriage without ever suspecting the torch he carried for Diane. It probably wouldn't have mattered if he did. Number one son, Francois Jr., had already been married off and had been groomed for the job for years. Who cared who Henry slept with? Did it bother his lover to see two young kids being treated as callously as she was at their age? Ironically, not at all. If her experience with wedded bleh taught her anything, it was that silly things like marriages didn't matter. Not when there were other ways to secure her position. Catherine played right into Diane's hands. She wasn't particularly good-looking compared to our seated babe about town. And while Diane came from aristocratic stock, many at court sniffed out the new bride's common merchant origins. She also saw in Catherine an asset she could control. A young, naive, low-rung heiress without the savvy God gave a hamster. The entire matter was settled at her estate, with Diane looking on as the dutiful hostess. When France celebrated the royal wedding in 1533, the bride and the groom were 14 years old. Decked in black and white, Diane made sure to attend, sitting with the other notorious and notoriously fat-pursed distant relatives of her family. From the audience, she and her prince exchanged glances and seemingly innocent smiles. To them, the ceremony didn't matter. The pimply-faced teen already had the woman of his dreams, and she his heart. Marrying the Italian noblewoman wouldn't change anything. That was certainly a letdown for Catherine. Scholars believe she truly loved Henry, falling head over heels for him when they first met. She was devoted to her new life and new husband and was determined to do whatever it took to maintain her position. Little did she know what lengths that would entail. As a Medici, Catherine was schooled from birth to be a respectable and ruthless regal. It was practically interwoven into her DNA. Her marriage was her calling. She would do anything to ensure her position and her family's role on the international stage was preserved. Typically, this meant permitting a number of offenses never mentioned in a Disney princess's tale. Catherine was quite prepared to tolerate her husband taking a mistress or two. Honestly, as far as marital abuses go, infidelity really wasn't so bad. If need be, she would permit herself to be beaten, her escorts exiled, and be isolated herself. But that wasn't exactly what happened. The couple's marriage was consummated immediately, per the arrangement, before a gallery of spectators, including King Francois himself. When it was finished, the groom rolled over and declared Diane the love of his life and his official mistress. Mistresses were big business, and as we've seen with the Boleyn girls in season 1, a legitimate profession. While wives were for breeding, a mistress was a companion, confidant, and an emotional support vagina all rolled into one. Educated in culture, arts, and a variety of entertainments, they were on call 24/7. Try getting that from an arranged marriage. For women, it provided a means to independence and financial security without servitude, celibacy, or being burned at the stake. Although frowned upon, the right arrangement could be very lucrative. Bagging the right royal could lead to gifts, property, jewels, titles, and steady compensation. Some mistresses even negotiated formal contracts, including pensions. And if she got knocked up, so much the better. Baby could go a long way to further cement her financial security, so long as she could maintain her lover's interests, and it looked like him. While the chances of her children being recognized as legitimate heirs was remote, many patrons took responsibility for their offspring, providing for their education and arranging advantageous marriages for them. All she had to do was be present, pleasant, and available at a moment's notice. Poor Catherine was rabid with jealousy when she heard the news, but Diane could handle it. She positioned herself as, if not Catherine's friend, an experienced advisor to help her learn the ropes of the new court. She advised the young consort to avoid any unnecessary drama, be obedient and indulgent, and let Henry come around. She assured her it was probably a case of wedding nerves, and even offered to counsel him on her behalf. What a pal! Catherine did as suggested, but things didn't change. Diane counseled him night and day, never leaving his side. And yet Henry continued to show no interest in her. In public, Catherine restrained herself, but her private thoughts dripped with bitterness. She once wrote that even when she obeyed Henry's will to play nice with his mistress, I always let him know that I was acting sorely against the grain. For never did a woman who loved her husband succeed in loving his whore, for one cannot call her otherwise. So much of Henry's free time was spent with Diane, he hardly had time for anything else. He followed all of her advice, whether it was reading, exercises, or political decisions. He followed every word as if Moses brought it down from the mountain on a stone slab. While Catherine watched her world crumble, Henry openly flaunted Diane to the court. He showered her with gifts and began to wear her colors as well as her crescent moon emblem. He even went as far as creating a monogram of his and Diane's initials intertwined, which were displayed on everything from personal items to buildings. It drove Catherine nuts to be second in line for everything, forced to hold her tongue while Diane plunged hers God knows where. This wasn't what she envisioned their marriage would be, and she grew desperate to validate her place in Henry's heart. Like so many women before her, and let's just say it, since, Catherine figured the best way to fix her marriage was with a baby. I mean, when hasn't that worked? She threw herself into continuing the French royal line, but like everything else in her life, it wasn't that easy. Try as she might, she just couldn't conceive. On the advice of doctors, healers, and her ladies-in-waiting, she tried all sorts of remedies. Some of the more conventional fertility fixes included foods known for their seeds or eggs, like pomegranates, beans, eggs, walnuts, herring, and salmon. Teas from comfrey, mugwort, mandrake, red clover, nettles, and dandelions were also said to be helpful. And consuming a roasted sow's womb was believed to help a woman conceive, so that was on the menu too. Acupressure and massage were used to help bring about a royal baby, as well as baths with herbs or holy water. Ladies-in-waiting would also scramble to find relics or sacred objects their mistresses could wear or keep in a pocket. Rabbit pelts and clothing from a woman who had successfully conceived were common, as were semi-precious stones like coral and jade. Exposure to the elements or timing intercourse with the sun or lunar cycles was also a common practice, as was smoking the royal bedchamber with incense. Specific sexual positions were recommended and often insisted upon by a group of concerned onlookers. It was a court thing. They weren't going to let the fate of the kingdom rest in the hands of a married couple alone. When those didn't work, one would move on to more non-traditional remedies. Medicines and elixirs with curious ingredients like ground staghorn or ox dung. And of course, there was prayer. Early forms of artificial insemination were also used by injecting semen into a woman's womb using a small tube-like instrument. We'll leave the origin of the speculum for another day. If you do a Google search or let ChatGPT do it, you'll soon discover many of these remedies are still in use. One more demonstration of how little the field of gynecology has advanced. Scary, isn't it? When all else failed, a male doctor could always be relied on to recommend bloodletting. And if that didn't work, there was always another cultural constant. Blame the woman. Catherine tried every potion and poultice she found. She was forever ingesting or applying bizarre ointments and concoctions with no luck. When Diane gave birth to Henry's first child, a son named Sebastian, she was crushed. And her reputation at court was starting to smell worse than a charcuterie board left out in the sun. It wasn't long before advisors started suggesting Henry divorce and replace her, with a bride better equipped to bear an heir. The rumors of a potential divorce were obviously upsetting to Catherine, but for Diane, the possibility was far worse. She would have to ingratiate herself to a whole new queen and was in no mood to allow a new, potentially beautiful wife slip under her lover's sheets and turn him away. She knew where she stood with Catherine and controlled Henry's attentions. Why break something that didn't need to be fixed? So they became allies. She appealed to Henry to stay with Catherine and refuse a divorce. Her pillow talk became a litany of all of Catherine's good qualities. In bed, she promoted her piety, youth, and her good, gentle nature. Capitalizing on the growing rift between father and son, she advised him not to listen to his father, who was obviously trying to manipulate him. The gullible young prince didn't want to be seen as under his father's boot, not to his girlfriend anyway. So he finally relented and agreed to work on his marriage. But the real decision lay with the king himself. Diane had a plan for that too. At her suggestion, Catherine sobbed at her father-in-law's feet, begging for another chance. How could he send her away so cruelly? Away? Back to the Medicis? Eventually, the king saw the light. Any idea of a divorce was called off. As for the matter of that all-too-necessary baby, the women put their enmity aside, and Diane set to work getting Catherine knocked up. She provided a whole new list of potions for Catherine to try, and encouraged both she and Henry to read texts by ancient physicians and mystics. She even prescribed her new gal pal a steady regimen of mule urine. Not to wear, but to drink. I can only imagine what was going on inside Catherine's head when she learned this. Do you think Diane smiled or kept a straight face? When that didn't work, Diane gave Catherine lessons in lovemaking. If there was one thing Diane knew how to do well, it was copulate. She even had her pupil observe. Catherine threw her rage and disgust aside and had holes drilled in the floorboards above Diane's bedchambers to watch her technique. Something tells me she preferred drinking mule urine. Surprisingly, watching the two of them go at it like rabbits did little to impregnate her. So Diane decided more severe measures were needed. Henry was so glued to her side that she had to start pushing him to perform his marital duties more frequently. Her persuasion did the trick. Catherine finally conceived. And all it took was Henry sleeping with his wife. Who would have thought? We'll pick up the story next week. This has been Frenemies. Thanks for listening. Frenemies is a production of Toil and Trouble Media. Executive produced by Jennifer Beck. This episode was also written and performed by Jennifer Beck. I'm kind of a big deal. Additional production assistance was provided by Aaron Iris, and our music was performed by Snowflake and Admiral Bob. Thanks, guys. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen and tell your friends. It's a cheap way to support us, and it really helps the show get noticed. Tell your frenemies, too. We're good with that. And be sure to subscribe wherever you listen and follow us on social media so you'll never miss an episode. If you want even more Toil and Trouble media in your life, be sure to check out our Patreon page, where, for a couple bucks, you can get access to early and ad-free episodes of all our shows, and our website at toilandtroublemedia.com, where we have merch, blogs, and much more. And as always, thanks for listening.